So it's Super Bowl Sunday, your phone's blowing up, group chats are buzzing, your coworkers have been talking about it all week. There's a party happening down the street with a crowd gathered around a massive TV, and someone just spent $200 on wings and dip. And you're just sitting there thinking, am I broken? People are yelling at grown men in helmets like their rent depends on it. And you're on the couch, politely nodding, wondering how a single football game became a cultural event that feels bigger than some national holidays. And the thing is, you're not even trying to be different. You're not anti-sports, you're not judging anyone, you just genuinely don't feel it. The hype never arrives. The excitement never clicks. And at some point, you start asking a quieter, more uncomfortable question. Why does everyone else seem to care so much, and why don't I? Most people assume the answer is simple. Oh, you just don't like sports, or you don't get it because you didn't grow up watching football, or my personal favorite, you'd like it if you understood the rules. But that explanation is way too shallow for what's actually happening in your brain. Because the psychology of people who don't get the Super Bowl hype isn't about football at all. It's about how your mind relates to emotion, identity, stimulation, and collective experience. Let me show you what I mean. Picture this. You're watching the game with friends. Something big happens, a touchdown, a last-second play, a controversial call. The room explodes. People jump up. Someone spills a drink. Someone else starts explaining the play at the speed of light, and you feel nothing. Or maybe a delayed intellectual reaction. You understand that this moment is important, but you don't feel pulled into it emotionally. That gap between understanding and feeling is the first clue. A lot of Super Bowl hype runs on emotional contagion. That's the psychological phenomenon where emotions spread through groups like a virus. Laughter in a crowd feels louder, fear in a crowd feels sharper. Excitement multiplies just because other people are excited. For many brains, this happens automatically. The nervous system syncs up with the group, dopamine rises, adrenaline kicks in, the moment feels electric. But some people's brains don't sync that way. Not because they're cold or detached, but because they process emotion more internally than socially. If you're someone who doesn't get the hype, your brain is likely more self-referenced than group-referenced. That means your emotional responses come from personal meaning, not collective intensity. You don't borrow excitement just because it's in the air. Your brain asks a different question first. Does this matter to me? And if the answer is no, the emotional volume stays low, even if the room is losing its mind. This is especially common in people who are introspective, analytical, or psychologically independent. You're less moved by spectacle and more moved by significance. You don't get swept up easily. You observe before you absorb. And here's the thing, no one tells you. Modern sports culture isn't just about the game, it's about identity. For a lot of people, the Super Bowl isn't football. It's belonging, it's tribal. Teams become symbols. Cities, families, friendships, even childhood memories get wrapped into a logo and a set of colors. Cheering isn't just cheering, it's saying, this is my group. If you're someone who never tied your sense of self to a team, the emotional hook just isn't there. Watching the Super Bowl feels like watching someone else's inside joke. You can appreciate the skill, you can respect the effort, but you're not emotionally invested because your identity isn't on the line. And that's actually a psychological strength, even though it rarely gets framed that way. People who don't get swept into large-scale hype often have a more internally anchored identity. You don't outsource your sense of meaning to mass events. You don't need a shared ritual to feel connected to yourself. Your sense of self is quieter, more private, more self-generated. But in a culture that celebrates loud passion, that kind of inner stability can feel like absence. There's also the stimulation factor. The Super Bowl is intense. Fast cuts, loud sounds, bright visuals, constant commentary, ads designed to hijack your attention every 30 seconds. For some brains, that's dopamine heaven. For others, it's cognitive overload. If you're more sensitive to stimulation, your nervous system may not experience excitement, it experiences fatigue. Instead of this is thrilling, your brain feels this is a lot. You may find yourself zoning out, scrolling your phone, or retreating inward, not because you're bored, but because your brain is self-regulating. This is especially true for people who recharge in low stimulation environments. Solitude, quiet focus, meaningful conversation. Compared to that, a Super Bowl party can feel like standing next to a speaker at a concert you didn't choose to attend. Another layer that rarely gets talked about is emotional authenticity. Some people genuinely struggle to perform excitement they don't feel. You might notice everyone cheering and feel a subtle pressure to match the energy. Clap, smile, react at the right time. And instead of joining in, you feel slightly disconnected not from the game, but from the performance of enthusiasm. That's because your brain values emotional congruence. You don't want to fake a feeling just to fit in. And when excitement doesn't arise naturally, you don't manufacture it. Ironically, this can make you seem distant or uninterested, when in reality, you're deeply honest with yourself. There's also a philosophical layer here. Big events like the Super Bowl often carry an unspoken message. This matters. Pay attention. This is important. But if you're someone who tends to question meaning instead of accepting it, your brain may quietly push back. You might find yourself thinking about things like the scale of attention versus actual impact, the money, the spectacle, the contrast between what's celebrated and what's ignored. Not in a judgmental way, just in a reflective one. And once your mind zooms out like that, it's hard to zoom back in and scream at the TV. What's interesting is that many people who don't get the Super Bowl hype are deeply passionate about other things. Music, art, ideas, niche hobbies, one-on-one conversations, personal growth. When something does light you up, it lights you up fully, but it has to be personal, meaningful, and aligned with who you are. Your excitement is selective, not absent. And because it's selective, it tends to be misunderstood. We often assume that people who don't care about popular events are detached, antisocial, or emotionally flat. But psychologically, the opposite is often true. You may feel things very deeply, just not collectively, not performatively, and not on demand. Your emotional world isn't loud, it's precise. And that precision matters. There's also something to be said about autonomy. Large-scale hype events thrive on shared scripts. Watch this, react now, care about this. If you're someone who values autonomy mentally, emotionally, psychologically, your brain may resist being told what to feel. Not aggressively, just quietly. You choose what matters to you. And if the Super Bowl didn't make the list, your brain doesn't pretend otherwise. As the night goes on, you might notice something else. Once the game ends, once the confetti settles, once the crowd noise fades, most people move on. The emotional high dissolves. Monday arrives, life resumes. But the things that matter to you, they stay. They're not tied to a single night or a final score. They live in your routines, your thoughts, your long-term curiosity. That doesn't make you better than anyone else. But it does mean your brain is wired for depth over spectacle. So if you've ever felt odd, disconnected, or vaguely guilty for not caring about the Super Bowl the way everyone else does, here's the reframe. Nothing is missing in you. Your brain simply isn't powered by mass emotion, tribal identity, or performative excitement. It's powered by meaning, autonomy, and internal resonance. You don't need the crowd to tell you when to feel alive. And in a world that's constantly shouting, that quiet clarity is rare. If this made you feel seen, or if you've ever sat through a Super Bowl party wondering why you feel like an anthropologist instead of a fan, let me know in the comments. I read them. And if you're curious about the psychology behind other "why am I like this" moments, you might want to stick around.